Then they say he hired a lawyer, and they call it suspicious. Mighty suspicious. They wouldn't have kicked if he had hired Rube Arnold, because Rube has a good character. But they hired me, and they kicked and yelled suspicious so loudly you could hear it all the way from here to Jessup's Cut. I don't know that I had ever met Frank before that morning, but I had represented the pencil factory previously. And as to their employing me, it's this way. There's no telling what was floating around in John Black's head that morning. They sent men after Frank, and there was no telling what was likely to happen to him. They were forced to do something in his own defense. And, as a result, the state's worst suspicion is the fact that they employed me and Herbert Haas. Now, gentlemen, let's see what there is in it. I have told you that twice on that Sunday he had been to police headquarters without counsel, without friends. The next day they adopted new methods of getting him there, and sent 2 detectives for him. Black had said he had been watching Frank. And woe to him who was haunted by the eagle eye of dear old John. They took him to police station Monday. Took him, I say. The police idea was to show their fangs. He was under arrest, that's an undisputed fact. They had him at police station, Lanford in his wonted dignity, sitting around doing nothing, letting Frank soak. Beavers, the handsome one, was doing the same. Frank didn't call for friends or lawyer. He didn't call for anything. If he had known what he was up against, though, in this police department of ours, he'd probably have called for 2 lawyers, or even more. But old man Sig Montag, who has been here a long time, knew this old police crowd, and he knew their tactics. He was well on to their curves. He knew what danger there was to Frank. He called up Haas. Haas didn't want to come to the police station. He had a good reason. Sig went to the police station and was refused permission to see Frank. Now, I want you to get that in your mind. A citizen. Not under arrest, as they say. Held without the privilege of seeing friends, relatives, or counsel. It was a deplorable state of affairs. What happened? Haas went to the phone and called an older and more experienced head to battle with this police iniquity. Why shouldn't he? Dorsey sees in this harmless message a chance. He snaps at it like a snake. Dorsey is a good man. In his way. He'll be a better man, though, when he gets older and loses some of his present spirit and venom. There are things he has done in this trial that will never be done again. Gentlemen, I assure you of that. Did Frank do anything else suspicious? Just 2 others, according to Hooper from the Wiregrass. One of which was the employment of a detective agency to ferret out this horrible murder that had been committed in his factory building. Why? Under what circumstances? I'll tell you. Frank had been to the police station and had given his statement. Haas was the man who telephoned me and who employed me, not Frank. I went to police headquarters and was very much unwelcomed. There was a frigid atmosphere as I walked in. I saw Frank for the first time in my life. I said, "What's the matter, boys?" Somebody answered that Mr. Frank was under arrest. Black was there, Lanford was there. Neither took the pains to deny that he was under arrest. Somebody said they wanted Mr. Frank to make a statement, and I advised him to go ahead and make it. When he went to the office, I followed. They said, "We don't want you." I replied that whether they wanted me or not, I was coming anyhow. I had a good reason, too, for coming. I wanted to hear what he said so they couldn't distort his words. While we were in the room, a peculiar thing happened. Frank exposed his person. There were no marks. I said that it was preposterous to think that a man could commit such a crime and not bear some marks. Lanford's face fell. Why didn't Lanford get on the stand and deny it? Was it because he didn't want to get into a loving conflict with me? Or did he want to keep from reopening the dark and nasty history of the Conley story and the Manola McKnight story that are hidden in the still darker recesses of police headquarters? Frank makes his statement and is released. He goes back to the pencil factory, assuming that suspicion has been diverted from him. He thinks of the horrible murder that has been committed in his plant. He telephones Sig Montag about hiring a detective agency to solve the crime. Sig advises him to do it. I don't believe there is any detective living who can consort with crooks and criminals and felons, scheme with them, mingle with them, and spy on the homes of good people and bad, who can then exalt his character as a result. He absorbs some of the atmosphere and the traits. It is logical that he should. But even at that, they've got some good men in the detective and police department. Old man Sig Montag said, "Hire a detective," and Frank hired the Pinkertons. Scott came and took Frank's statement and said, "We work in cooperation with the city police department." Now, isn't that a horrible situation, going hand in glove with the police department? But it's a fact. Just as soon as Scott left Frank, he walked down, arm in arm with John Black, to the nasty, smelly basement of the pencil factory. What did that mean? It meant a complete lineup with the police. It meant if the police turn you loose, I turn you loose. If the police hang you, I hang you. Gentlemen, take a look at this spectacle if you can. Here is a Jewish boy from the north. He is unacquainted with the South. He came here alone and without friends, and he stood alone. This murder happened in his place of business. He told the Pinkertons to find the man, trusting to them entirely, no matter where or what they found might strike. He is defenseless and helpless. He knows his innocence and is willing to find the murderer. They try to place the murder on him. God, all merciful and all powerful, look upon a scene like this. Anything else? Yes. Look at this. I do not believe my friend, who preceded me, intended to do this. I refer to the incident about the time slip. I have to use harsh words here, but I don't want to. This seems to me the most unkindest exit of all. They say that time slip was planted. They say the shirt was planted. Gentlemen, is there any evidence of this? Let's see about this statement. Black and somebody else, I believe, went out to Newt's house on Tuesday morning and found the shirt in the bottom of a barrel. They brought the shirt back to the police station, and Newt said the shirt was his. Or it looked like his shirt. Newt Lee had been hired at the factory but 3 weeks, yet they want you to believe that they found a shirt like the old man had and went out to his house and put it in a barrel. One thing is wrong. The newspapers and others, I am afraid, think this is a contest between lawyers. It is not. God forbid that I should let any such thing enter into this case when this boy's life is at stake. There are several things I don't understand about this case and never will. Why Old Man Lee didn't find the body sooner. Why he found it lying on its face. How he saw it from a place he could not have seen it from. I was raised with niggers and know something about them. I do not know them as well as the police, perhaps, for they know them like no one else. But I know something about them. There must have been a nigger in the crime who knew about it before Newt or anyone else. I am afraid Newt knew. Yet, if he did, he is one of the most remarkable niggers I ever saw, and I wish I had his nerve. There were things you detectives did to him for which you will never be forgiven. You persecuted the old nigger, and all you got was, "Fo God, I don't know." I don't believe he killed her, but I believe he knows more than he told. But they say now that he jumped back. Suppose he did jump back. Look at the boy. Frank. If you put a girl the size of Mary Phagan in a room with him, she could make him jump out of the window. Suddenly, this boy stepped out in front of this giant of a Gant, and he jumped back. Dorsey would have done the same thing. Newt Lee would. Jim Conley would. And I would, as big as I am. Here is another suspicious thing. Newt Lee came to the factory at 4 o'clock, and Frank sent the old man away. It was suggested that he was afraid the nigger would find the body, yet when he came back at 6, Frank let him stay at the factory when he knew that in 30 minutes Newt was on the job. He must go into the basement where they say Frank knew the body was. They say he was laughing at his home. If he had known of the crime of which he would be accused, that laugh would have been the laugh of a maniac, to be ended by the discovery of the body. Another suspicious thing. You know that he was in the factory, but it turns out that he was not the only one. If the corpse was found in the basement, and he was the only one in the building, then there might be some basis. But he was in an open room, and there were workmen upstairs. My friend tried to dispute that. That wasn't all. Conley was also there, and it came out yesterday that there was also another nigger, a lighter nigger than Conley, there. What scoundrels and white skin were in the building and had opportunity to commit the crime, God only knows. The thing that arises in this case to fatigue my indignation is that men born of such parents should believe the statement of Conley against the statement of Frank. Who is Conley? Who was Conley as he used to be and as you have seen him? He was a dirty, filthy, black, drunken, lying nigger. Black knows that. Starnes knows that. Chief Beavers knows it. Who was it that made this dirty nigger come up here looking so slick? Why didn't they let you see him as he was? They shaved him, washed him, and dressed him up. Gentlemen of the jury, the charge of moral perversion against a man is a terrible thing for him, but it is even more so when that man has a wife and mother to be affected by it. Even Dalton did not say this against Frank. It was just Conley. Dalton, you remember, did not even say that Frank was guilty of wrongdoing as far as he knew. There never was any proof of Frank's alleged moral perversion, unless you call Jim Conley proof. None of these niggers ever came up and said Conley was there, and that they were with him. Starnes could find a needle in a haystack, but the Lord only knows what he'd do in an acre. He could not find any of these niggers. Then there was that old Negro drayman, old McCrary, the old peg-leg Negro drayman, and thank God he was an old-timer, faux de war nigger. You know Conley, wishing to add a few finishing trimmings to his lines, said that old McCrary sent him down in the basement that Saturday morning, and when the old darky was put on the stand, he said simply, "No, boss, I never sent him down thar." Everywhere you go, you find that Conley lied. He says he watched there one Saturday last year between 2 and 3 o'clock. Well, Schiff says he didn't, and so does Darley and Holloway, the latter guaranteed by the state, and the little office boys, nice-looking little chaps from nice families. They all say he didn't. Cut out Conley, and you strip the case to nothing. Did you hear the way Conley told his story? Have you ever heard an actor who knew his Shakespearean plays, his Merchant of Venice, or his Hamlet? He can wake up at any time of the night and say those lines, but he can't say any lines of a play he has never learned. So it was with Conley. He could tell the story of the disposition of the girl's body, and he knew it so well he could reel it off backward or forward, any old way, but when you got to asking him about other things, he always had one phrase. "Boss, I can't 'member dat." They say Conley could not have made up that story. Well, I don't know about that. There is something queer in the whole thing, you know. I couldn't climb that post over there, gentlemen. I mean, I couldn't go very far up it. But if I had Professor Starnes, and Professor Black, and Professor Campbell, and Professor Rosser, and then Dean Lanford to help me, I'd go quite a way up. Well, they took a notion Mrs. White had seen the Negro, and they carried Mrs. White there to see him, and he twisted up his features so that she couldn't recognize him. Next, they learned Conley could write. Frank told them that, you know. Well, I don't mean to be severe, but they took that Negro, and they gave him the 3rd degree. Black and Scott cursed him. "You black scoundrel," they yelled at him. "You know that man never had you come there and write those notes on Friday." And the poor Negro, understanding and trying to please, said, "Yes, boss, that's right. I was there on Saturday." And so they went on and got first one affidavit and then another out of him. Well, Scott and Black had him there, and Conley was only in high school. I don't know whether to call Scott and Black professors or not. Scott says, "We told him what would fit and what would not." And it was, "Stand up, James Conley, and recite. When did you fix those notes, James?" And James would answer that he fixed them on Friday, and then the teachers would tell James it was surely wrong, that he must have fixed them on Saturday. And James would know what was wanted, and would acknowledge his error. Then it would be, "That's a good lesson, James. You are excused, James." I'm not guessing in this thing. Scott told it on the stand, only in not-so-plain words. So it was that when this Negro had told the whole truth, they had another recitation. Was it fair for 2 skilled white men to train that Negro by the hour and by the day, and to teach him, and then get a statement from him, and call it the truth? Well, Professors Black and Scott finished with him, and they thought Conley's education was through, but that nigger had to have a university course. Scott, you and Black milked him dry. You thought you did, anyhow. But you got no moral perversion and no watching. In the university, they gave a slightly different course. It was given by Professors Starnes and Campbell. Oh, I wish I could look as pious as Starnes does. And Professor Dorsey helped out, I suppose. I don't know what Professor Dorsey did, only he gave him several lessons, and they must have been just sort of finishing touches before he got his degree. Well, in the university course, they didn't dare put the steps in writing, as they had done in the high school. It would have been too easy to trace from step to step, the suggestions made, the additions and subtractions here and there. Professor Dorsey had him 7 times, I know that, but God alone knows how many times the detectives had him. Was it fair to take this weak, pliable Negro and have these white men teach him, one after another? Who knows what is the final story that Conley will tell? He added the mesh bag when he was on the stand. Mary Phagan had reached the factory at approximately 12 minutes after 12, and it must have been after Montine Stover had gone. See the statements of W. M. Matthews and W. T. Hollis, streetcar men called by the defense, and George Epps, the little newsie, called by the state, and also the streetcar schedule. But supposing that she was there at 12:05, as I believe the state claims, then Montine Stover must have seen her. I don't see how they could have helped meeting. But suppose she got there a moment after Montine Stover left, then Lemmy Quinn was there at 12:20, and he found Frank at work. Could Frank have murdered a girl and hid her body and then got back to work with no bloodstains on him in less than 15 minutes? If Frank is guilty, he must have, according to Conley, disposed of the body in the time between 4 minutes to 1 and 1:30. There can be no dispute about this. It's Conley's last revelation. If Frank is guilty, he was at his office between 4 minutes to 1 and 1:30. But who believes that story? Little Miss Kearns saw him in Alabama and Whitehall at 1:10, and at 1:20 Mrs. Levy, honest woman that she is, saw him get off the car at his home corner, and his wife's parents saw, and they all swear he was there at 1:20. And then if you were going to call them all perjurers and believe Jim Conley, think what you must do. Think what a horrible thing you must do. You must make Minola's husband a perjurer. And that would be terrible. You know about that Minola McKnight affair. It is the blackest of all. A Negro woman locked up from the solicitor's office, not because she wouldn't talk. She's given a statement. But because she would not talk to suit Starnes and Campbell, and two white men, and shame to them, got her into it. Where was Chief Beavers? What was he doing that he became a party to this crime? Beavers, who would enforce the law. Beavers, the immaculate. Believe Frank was in the factory if you can at 1:30. Throw aside all the respectable people and swear by Conley. Well, I know the American jury is supreme, that it is the sovereign over lives, that sometimes you can sway it by passion and prejudice, but you can't make it believe anything like this. Neither prejudice nor passion, wrought by monsters so vile they ought not to be in the courtroom, could make them believe it. They said that there was a certain man, named Mincy, whom we called as a witness but did not use. Well, the only use he would have had for Mincy was to contradict Conley, and as soon as Conley got on the stand, he contradicted himself enough, without our having to go to the trouble of calling on witnesses to do it. If we had put Mincy up there, would have been a day's row about his probity, and what would have been the use? Conley said, time and again, that he had lied time and again. Gentlemen, I want only the straight truth here, and I have yet to believe that the truth has to be watched and cultivated by these detectives and by 7 visits of the Solicitor General. I don't believe any man, no matter what his rate, ought to be tried under such testimony. If I was raising sheep and feared for my lambs, I might hang a yellow dog on it. I might do it in the daytime, but when things got quiet at night and I got to thinking, I'd be ashamed of myself. You have been overly kind to me, gentlemen. True, you have been up against a situation like that old Sol Russell used to describe, when he would say, well, I've lectured off and on for 40 years, and the benches always stuck it out, but they was screwed to the floor. You gentlemen have been practically in that fix, but I feel, nevertheless, that you have been peculiarly kind, and I thank you. You've been listening to our continuing audiobook series featuring the best writing from the American Mercury on the Leo Frank case. Be with us next time when we'll continue with the next installment of the American Mercury on Leo Frank.